The new deadbolt caught my key halfway and would not turn. Cold rain slid off the porch roof and tapped the paper bag in my hand, where June's favorite cinnamon rolls were getting wet. Through the dining room window, I could see my own Thanksgiving table set for 12. Then my daughter spoke from the other side of the door. "Dad, you need somewhere safer now." I tried the key, again slower this time. It stopped at the same place. The brass teeth were right. The lock was not. Behind Claire, I heard silverware low conversation and the hollow clang of June's blue roasting pan touching the oven rack. That sound reached me harder than the rain. Claire had changed the locks on my house and used my wife's pan to serve dinner without me. "Open the door," I said. My voice stayed level. Years of working with locks had taught me that force usually damages the wrong thing first. Claire answered through the wood. "We are not doing this today. You agreed to move somewhere with supervision. I had agreed to no such thing. I had signed nothing. But several relatives inside had already been told otherwise." A shadow crossed the narrow glass beside the door. My son-in-law Ben stood behind Claire, but did not speak. Someone in the dining room asked whether I had arrived. Claire raised her voice and said I was confused about the address again. The room went quiet for one long second. Then forks began moving as though silence itself had been instructed to cooperate. I set the paper bag on the porch bench and took out my phone. First, I photographed the deadbolt, then the keypad mounted above it, then the white service sticker on the jamb. It carried a work number and installation time and the initials of the technician. Claire saw the camera through the side glass. "Dad, please stop making this ugly," she said. The sentence almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because people often describe evidence as ugly when they preferred the event without a record. I took one more photograph of the service van parked across the street. Then I asked for my coat, my medication, and June's roasting pan. Claire opened the inner latch, but kept the chain fastened. She passed my coat through the gap. My medication followed in a grocery sack. The blue pan did not. "It belongs with the house now," she said. Behind her, Ben lowered his eyes. I felt the ache in my right hand, where arthritis had thickened the first knuckle. I pressed my thumb against it and counted 4 breaths. Then I picked up the wet paper bag and stepped off my own porch. Before I tell you what the county notary found in June's deed and why Claire's new lock cost her the house she expected to inherit, tell me where you are listening from. And if you believe dignity should never expire with age, please like this story and subscribe. 3 weeks earlier, I still believed Thanksgiving would be difficult only because June was gone. My name is Gordon Pike. I was 68 years old, a retired master locksmith, and I had lived in the same white 2-story house in Des Moines, Iowa, since 1981. I knew every hinge latch cylinder and stubborn window in it because I had repaired most of them myself. For 37 years, I worked on schools, courthouses, libraries, and city offices. My job was not simply opening doors. It was controlling who had the right to pass through them and leaving a record when that right changed. A key means nothing without authority. That principle had kept buildings safe. I did not yet understand how much I would need it inside my own family. June and I bought the house when Claire was 3. The place had orange carpet, a leaking chimney, and a back door that could be opened with a butter knife. I replaced the lock the first night. June replaced the carpet the following spring. Over 4 decades, we turned the house into the kind of place people entered without knocking, because they knew they were welcome. Thanksgiving belonged to June. She started cooking before sunrise and refused all help until the kitchen became unmanageable. Her blue enamel roasting pan had a chipped handle and a pale scratch across the bottom. From the year I tried to carve the turkey inside it, she kept using it anyway. "A scar proves a thing was useful," she used to say. June died from heart failure 22 months before Claire changed the locks. After the funeral, the house felt larger than it had any right to feel. I kept the dining table where June left it. I kept her recipe cards in the second drawer. And every Sunday, I wiped the blue roasting pan even when it had not been used. Claire was 42 and my only child. She had been practical from the time she could tie her shoes. She made lists, read fine print, and disliked uncertainty. When she was younger, those traits made me proud. Later I learned that being organized and being honest are not the same skill. Her husband Ben Hollis managed building maintenance for a chain of small medical offices. He understood doors well enough to respect my trade, but not well enough to argue with me about hardware. Ben was quiet, careful, and usually one sentence behind whatever Claire had decided. For years I mistook that for patience. The first warning came on a Monday evening when Claire brought dinner and a folder. She said the papers concerned emergency planning. One page allowed her to speak with my doctors. Another named her as a contact for utility outages. A third authorized her to arrange temporary housing if my home became unsafe. I read every line. Claire watched the clock while I did it. "Dad, these are standard," she said. I told her standard papers cause standard trouble when people signed without reading. She smiled the way adults smile at a child who has repeated an old story. Then she tapped the signature line and asked whether my hand was bothering me. My hand was bothering me. That did not mean it had stopped belonging to me. I signed nothing. Claire gathered the pages, saying we could revisit them when I felt less defensive. The word defensive stayed in the room after she left, sitting between June's recipe box and my unpaid water bill like an accusation that had forgotten to go home. 2 days later, a man named Kirk Danner arrived to perform a home safety assessment. Claire had scheduled him without telling me. Kirk photographed the stairs, the gas stove, the basement door, and the medicine cabinet. He wrote down that I lived alone and asked whether I had ever fallen. I told him I had slipped on ice 6 winters earlier. He marked a box. I asked whether he planned to note that the stairs had handrails, the smoke detectors were current, and the front walk had been salted. Kirk said his report focused on risk factors. That was the first time I noticed he was collecting danger while ignoring evidence of safety. After he left, I called Claire. She said the assessment was required for a senior living consultation. I reminded her that I had not requested one. "You do not have to move tomorrow," she replied. "We are only creating options. People create options for themselves. They create exits for other people." The following week, my electric bill stopped arriving by mail. I found it inside an online account Claire had opened using my address and her email. The water account had also been changed. When I asked her why, she said paper bills were easy to lose and she was helping me stay current. I had never missed a utility payment in 46 years. Claire knew that. So did I. What mattered was not whether I needed help. What mattered was that every account she controlled made the story of my dependence easier to tell. Then my bank called. A customer service officer asked whether I intended to add Claire as an authorized account manager. The request had been started online but required verbal confirmation. I told him no. He paused, then asked whether anyone had pressured me to change access. I said not yet. That evening, I began a notebook. Date, time, request, account, witness. I listed every paper Claire brought, every service she arranged, and every account setting that changed without my approval. Locksmiths keep service logs because memory is generous to the person who benefits from confusion. Paper is less polite. The spare house key disappeared 3 days later. I kept it inside a ceramic bowl above the pantry shelf, a place Claire had known since high school. I searched the kitchen coat closet workbench and truck. It was gone. When I mentioned it, Claire sighed and asked whether I had checked my pockets. I had checked them twice. Maybe Mom moved it. She said, then stopped when she remembered June had been dead almost 2 years. The mistake lasted only a second, but it showed me how easily Claire reached for my grief when she needed an explanation. I replaced the spare with a newly cut key and marked the bow with a small file notch. Then I dusted the pantry bowl with graphite, a trick I had used when checking unauthorized key access in public buildings. 2 mornings later, the surface showed a clean thumbprint and the marked key was gone. I did not confront Claire. I installed a tiny contact sensor inside the pantry door and placed a numbered seal across the drawer where I kept property documents. Neither device would stop anyone. They would only tell me who believed they had permission. On the Friday before Thanksgiving, Claire called and said dinner would be held at her house because mine was too much work. I told her June had hosted every Thanksgiving there for 41 years and that I had already ordered the turkey. Claire said traditions should not become burdens. I asked who felt burdened. She did not answer. Instead, she told me to meet them at noon and offered to send Ben for the roasting pan. I refused. The pan would stay in my kitchen until I carried it to the table myself. Claire's voice cooled. "You are making objects more important than family," she said. I looked at June's pan drying beside the sink. "No," I replied. "I am noticing who keeps asking for both." Claire ended the call. 30 minutes later, the pantry sensor sent an alert, even though I was sitting in the living room. I reached the kitchen in time to see the back door easing shut. The numbered seal on the document drawer remained intact. The ceramic bowl was empty. Outside tire tracks crossed the damp alley behind the garage. Claire had not taken the deed papers. She had taken another key. On Thanksgiving morning, I left home at 7:30 to place white chrysanthemums at June's grave. The turkey rested in the refrigerator. The blue roasting pan sat on the counter. I locked the front door with my original key and checked it twice, the way I had checked public buildings before a holiday closure. When I returned at 9:12, a locksmith van was pulling away. The deadbolt was new, the keypad was new, and my daughter was already serving coffee inside. I spent Thanksgiving afternoon at the home of my neighbor Walter Finn, a widower who asked no questions until I finished eating. On Monday morning, I gathered every paper Claire had asked me to sign and drove to the Polk County Records Office. Miles Avery had worked behind the property counter for more than 20 years. He was also the notary who had witnessed June's signature on our last deed. When I told him Claire had changed the locks, he stopped sorting the pages and asked for the release form she wanted signed. He read the first page, then the second. On the third, his face lost color. Miles walked to a locked cabinet, removed a bound copy of June's deed, and placed it beneath the desk lamp. His finger followed one paragraph twice before he looked at me. "Do not sign another paper," he whispered. "Your daughter made one mistake." Then he turned the deed toward me and pointed to a clause June had never explained while she was alive. The first words were simple. The consequences were not. The clause Miles showed me would matter later. To understand why June had written it, you need to understand the house, the marriage, and the daughter we believed would inherit both with gratitude. Before Locke's deeds and court filings entered the story, that address had been the safest place I knew. June and I bought the house in 1981 for $42,000. We signed the mortgage at a metal desk, drove straight to the property, and ate hamburgers on the living room floor because the seller had taken every chair. Claire was 3 years old then. She ran from room to room, calling each empty space hers. The small bedroom facing the maple tree became hers because June said morning light made children brave. I replaced the loose window latch that night while Claire slept on a mattress between unpacked boxes. The front door had an old pin tumbler cylinder worn smooth by decades of keys. I changed it before midnight. June watched from the stairs holding a flashlight and a mug of coffee. "You do realize nobody knows we live here yet," she said. I told her security begins before trouble learns the address. She laughed and handed me the flashlight. That was our marriage in one small scene. I expected problems. June expected people. Between us, we built a life that was cautious without becoming cold. She remembered birthdays' names and who took sugar. I remembered which basement window never latched after heavy rain. Money was tight for the first 10 years. My city paycheck covered the mortgage, utilities, and most groceries. June worked part-time at an elementary school office, then kept records for a neighborhood pharmacy in the evenings. She balanced accounts at the kitchen table while Claire colored beside her. When Claire needed braces, we delayed replacing the furnace for one winter. I repaired the blower motor twice and slept near the basement door during cold nights to make sure it kept running. June sold a set of silver serving pieces from her mother. Claire never knew. We wanted her smile straight, not burdened. At 17, Claire was accepted into a college in Cedar Falls. The tuition letter arrived the same week the roof began leaking above our bedroom. June placed 2 buckets on the floor, read the college bill, and said the roof could wait until spring. I took private locksmith calls after work. Apartment managers phoned at midnight. Store owners called before sunrise. June answered the home line and wrote addresses on index cards. On weekends, she packed sandwiches into wax paper and sent me out with a thermos that always smelled faintly of cinnamon. Claire graduated with a degree in business administration and no student debt. At the ceremony, she hugged us both and said she would spend the rest of her life making the sacrifice worthwhile. June cried. I did not. I was busy pretending the folding chair had caused something to get in my eye. Years later, when Claire married Ben, we paid for the reception at a hotel near downtown Des Moines. Ben's parents covered the photographer and music. We handled the meal because June believed nobody should remember a wedding for being hungry. That pan had entered our family in 1979. June bought it at a hardware store after our first Thanksgiving turkey leaked through a disposable tray and filled the oven with smoke. The enamel was deep blue with white speckles. It was heavy enough to bruise a foot and dependable enough to survive my cooking. Every November, June placed it on the counter the night before Thanksgiving. She rubbed butter beneath the turkey skin, tied the legs with cotton string, and filled the cavity with onion apple and sage. The house would smell warm before the sun reached the dining room windows. Claire stood on a chair to help when she was small. Later, she rolled her eyes at the old recipes, but still arrived early to steal crisp pieces of skin. When she brought Ben for his first holiday meal, June let him lift the pan from the oven. He nearly dropped it and never volunteered again. After dinner, the pan soaked in the sink while relatives played cards. June washed it herself, no matter how many people offered. "Some things should be returned by the person who knows where they belong," she said. I thought she meant the cupboard. I understand now that she often meant more than one thing. The house carried those rituals in every room. Pencil marks inside the pantry showed Claire's height through age 16. A repaired dent in the hallway came from the year she tried indoor roller skates. The maple tree held a rusted hook from a swing I built when she was 6. For most of my life, I assumed memory made a home valuable to everyone who shared it. That was a father's mistake. Memory adds value only to people who feel responsible for it. To everyone else, a house is square footage equity and a future sale price. June first raised the subject of a special deed 7 years before she died. We were drinking coffee at the dining table when she asked whether Claire could sell the house if something happened to me. I told her no, not without owning it. June asked what would happen if I signed papers while sick. I laughed then, which embarrasses me now. "You think Claire would trick me?" I asked. June stirred her coffee even though she had added nothing to it. "I think good people make poor choices when fear and money arrive together," she said. That was as close as June came to accusing our daughter. At the time, Claire and Ben had just bought a larger house in West Des Moines. The down payment came partly from us. They said they needed room for future children, though children never came. We gave them $40,000 from our retirement savings and called it an early gift. A year later, Ben lost a management job after his employer merged with another company. Claire covered their bills while he searched. June quietly paid their property taxes that fall. I repaired their garage door, replaced 2 exterior locks, and installed a new water heater without charging for labor. They thanked us. They also adjusted quickly to being rescued. The first emergency had sounded temporary. The next one sounded expected. By the 4th, Claire no longer began with an apology. She began with the amount. June noticed the change before I did. She is starting to count our money from her side of the table. She told me after Claire asked how much equity remained in the house. I said she was planning responsibly. June replied that planning usually begins with your own property. That conversation led us to Ruth Calder, a real estate attorney whose office occupied the 2nd floor above a bookstore on Ingersoll Avenue. Ruth had represented the city on several title disputes and knew me from courthouse work. She spoke slowly, read quickly, and never used 10 words where 3 would hold. June explained that she wanted me protected for life. She also wanted Claire to receive the house after I died, provided she respected my right to remain there. Ruth proposed a life estate deed with Claire named as the remainder beneficiary. I understood the basic structure and trusted both women with the details. I signed because the deed preserved my ownership and control while giving Claire a clear future interest. June signed because she wanted no probate dispute after we were gone. The special condition was her idea. Ruth asked whether it was necessary. June said necessity often becomes visible too late. The condition stated that any remainder beneficiary who tried to remove me, block my entry, force a sale, or obtain my release through coercion would forfeit the future interest. The replacement beneficiary was a housing trust that supported older homeowners facing displacement. I remember asking June whether the language felt harsh. She looked at me across Ruth's desk. "It only punishes someone who does the thing," she said. Then she asked Ruth to keep the full original with the county record and provide us a certified copy. We placed our copy in a fireproof document case beneath the guest room closet shelf. Claire did not know the full condition. We told her only that the house would pass to her after both of us were gone. She hugged June and said we should stop talking like old people. We were in our early 60s. For several years, the deed remained nothing more than careful planning. Then June's heart began failing. Hospital visits replaced weekend trips. Prescription bottles multiplied near the sink. Claire helped often at first. She drove June to appointments, organized medications, and brought meals when I was too tired to cook. I was grateful. June was observant. One evening after Claire left, she asked whether our daughter had looked through the document case. I checked the closet and found the case turned backward. Nothing seemed missing. Claire said she had searched for an insurance policy at June's request. June denied asking her. We changed the case combination and said nothing. A month later, Claire asked whether the house had any restrictions on sale. I told her every property had restrictions. She wanted a clearer answer. June changed the subject before I gave one. During the final weeks of her illness, June spent most afternoons in the downstairs sitting room. The blue roasting pan remained in the cupboard above the refrigerator. One day she asked me to bring it down. She ran her fingers over the chipped handle and smiled. "Do not let Claire throw this away because it looks old," she said. "I promised." June looked toward the front hall where our keys hung on brass hooks. "And do not hand someone a key just because they say the house will be theirs someday." Her breathing was shallow, but her meaning was clear. I asked whether Claire had said something. June closed her eyes. "Not enough to accuse, enough to prepare," she replied. Those were the last words she ever spoke to me about the deed. She died 12 days later, with my hand around hers and Claire standing at the foot of the bed. After the funeral, Claire became attentive in a way that initially felt like love. She brought groceries, reviewed mail, and asked whether I needed help with bills. Ben changed furnace filters and cleared snow. Their visits kept the rooms from feeling empty, and I did not question every reason they gave for coming. Then the question shifted. Claire asked what the house was worth. She asked whether the mortgage had been paid. She asked where June kept tax records and whether the deed named her directly. Each question could be explained. Together, they formed a key being cut one notch at a time. I gave her broad answers and kept the details private. That disappointed her. She began saying I was overwhelmed. When I misplaced my reading glasses, she called it a warning sign. When I forgot the name of a restaurant, she asked whether I had spoken to my doctor. I was grieving, not disappearing. There is a difference, though. Grief gives impatient people room to pretend otherwise. I still balanced accounts, drove safely repaired locks for neighbors, and remembered every city master key system I had designed. Yet Claire began narrating my life as if memory itself had become unreliable. The missing spare key should have ended my doubt. Instead, I searched for excuses. Perhaps Ben needed it for a repair. Perhaps Claire meant to return it. Fathers can identify a damaged lock in seconds and still spend months refusing to identify damage in their own children. So, when Miles turned June's deed toward me that Monday morning, I was not learning that my wife had distrusted Claire. I was learning how long June had understood the risk and how carefully she had prepared for the day our daughter confused future inheritance with present ownership. Miles tapped the forfeiture clause once. The lock change came first. He said, "That is her mistake." Then he asked whether I had photographs, a service number, or any proof that Claire ordered the work before I signed the release. I placed my phone on the counter and opened the Thanksgiving pictures. The installation sticker showed the time. The service van showed the company name. The keypad screen showed Claire's initials as administrator. Miles looked at each image, then reached for a county evidence envelope. "Mr. Pike," he said, "your wife did not leave you a loophole. She left you a witness." Before I could answer, his desk phone rang. He listened for less than a minute, wrote an address on a yellow pad, and covered the receiver with his hand. The title company handling the sale had just requested verification of my deed. Closing was scheduled for Friday morning. According to its file, I had already agreed to move out. The title company's request changed the shape of the problem. Until that moment, Claire's behavior could still be described as pressure inside a family. A scheduled closing meant strangers had already been told my house was available. Someone had carried the lie beyond my front door and placed it inside a business file. Miles printed the verification request and handed it to me. The form listed a sale price of $380,000 and named Hawthorne Senior Living Partners as the buyer. I had never heard of the company. The proposed closing date was the Friday after Thanksgiving, only 4 days away. The seller section carried my name, but the contact email belonged to Claire. The forwarding address was a private apartment at Meadow Glen Residence, a senior complex on the north side of Des Moines. According to the form, I had agreed to move there before closing. I had never toured the place. Miles asked whether I wanted him to reject the verification immediately. I told him to wait until Ruth Calder reviewed everything. In lockwork, you do not slam a door while another person still has his hand inside the frame. You first learn what he is reaching for. I left the county office with certified copies of the deed, the verification request, and the release Claire wanted me to sign. The release looked simple. It stated that I voluntarily surrendered my life estate and acknowledged receiving independent advice. I had received no advice. I had not even been told what the page was. Ruth met me at her office before lunch. She read the release, the sale request, and the forfeiture clause without speaking. Then she placed the papers in separate stacks. "Claire needs your signature because she does not own a present right to possess the house," she said. Changing the locks did not fix that. It proved interference. I asked whether the deed had already removed her future interest. Ruth said the condition required evidence notice and a legal determination before the replacement beneficiary took title. June had not created magic words. She had created a clear path. We still had to walk it correctly. Ruth called the title company and requested a confidential hold based on a disputed life estate. She sent only enough to stop the closing. She did not send the lock photographs, the bank call, or my notebook. Claire needed to believe the only obstacle was my missing signature. Then Ruth asked me to reconstruct the previous 3 weeks in detail. I began with the first emergency planning folder. I described Kirk Danner's inspection, the utility changes, the bank request, and the missing keys. Ruth wrote dates in the margin and circled every event that involved a third-party record. "Family statements can be denied," she said. "Service records are less emotional." That sentence sounded like something June would have appreciated. Claire had built her plan around making me look confused. She had forgotten that confusion rarely generates matching invoices, login times, and appointment confirmations. The home safety report arrived by email that afternoon. Kirk had marked me at high risk for independent living. He cited the gas stove, second-floor bedroom basement steps, and missing medication oversight. He did not mention the handrails, working alarms, first-floor bathroom, or my clean medical review from 6 months earlier. He also wrote that my daughter had observed repeated memory lapses and unsafe wandering. I had never wandered. Claire had turned ordinary grief into a clinical-sounding pattern. The report recommended immediate placement in a supervised residence and transfer of property management to a responsible family member. I called Kirk from Ruth's conference room. Iowa law allowed a participant to record his own conversation, but Ruth still asked me to state that the call might be preserved. Kirk agreed. I asked who had hired him. He said Claire. I asked who had supplied the examples of memory loss. He said Claire and Ben. Then I asked whether he had seen me miss medication, leave the stove on, or become lost. Kirk admitted he had not. He said his report combined observations with family history. History provided by the person who wants control, I said. He did not answer. Ruth requested his contract notes and payment receipt. Kirk became cautious. He said Claire had paid through a company named Hearthway Transition Services. The name sounded like a care agency. Ruth searched the state business database and found it had been formed 6 weeks earlier. The registered manager was Ben Hollis. The mailing address matched a vacant office suite inside one of the medical buildings he maintained. Hearthway had no care license, no staff, and no public telephone listing. Its only visible purpose was to pay for assessments and create the appearance of professional elder planning. That discovery did not make Ben the architect. It made him the hand that signed where Claire pointed. Ruth told me weak accomplices often leave better records because they are too frightened to design clean systems. They save emails, follow instructions literally, and assume obedience will protect them later. The utility companies provided more. Claire had changed the communication preferences using a digital authorization form. The form carried an electronic signature in my name. The internet address came from her home network. The signature itself was typed in a font that tried to imitate handwriting. I had spent my career looking at keys cut by machine and keys filed by hand. Small differences tell you how something was made. My actual signature pressed downward at the first letter because of the arthritis in my knuckle. The electronic version floated evenly across the line. It had no weight because my hand had never touched it. The bank officer, a woman named Dana Webb, agreed to meet us the next morning. She showed me the account control request Claire had submitted. It named her as trusted manager with authority to move funds for housing, medical care, and property expenses. The justification said I had become unable to handle routine bills. Dana had delayed the request because my account history showed no missed payments, overdrafts, or unusual withdrawals. She called me instead of accepting the online form. That one careful decision kept Claire from gaining access to nearly $200,000 in savings. I thanked Dana. She said the bank trained staff to notice sudden family control after a spouse died. Grief makes people tired, she said. It does not make their children owners. A stranger at a bank had protected my judgment more carefully than my daughter had. Dana placed a verbal password on my accounts and required in-person approval for any new agent. She also printed the login history. Claire had attempted access 4 times in 10 days. Each attempt followed one of our arguments about the house. By Wednesday, my notebook had become a case file. I added bank records, utility forms, Kirk's report, and screenshots from the title request. Each page received a date and a source. I stored the original in Ruth's safe and kept a copy in a locked metal cabinet at Walter Finn's house. Walter had lived across the street for 27 years. He was 72, widowed, and suspicious of anyone who used the phrase, for your own good." When I told him Claire had begun controlling accounts, he offered his spare bedroom before I asked. Blood had changed my locks. A neighbor handed me a key. I still returned home each night before Thanksgiving because I had not yet been locked out. The house felt different. Cabinet doors stood open. Paper shifted on the desk. Once I found June's recipe drawer pulled halfway out. Nothing obvious disappeared, but someone was learning where every piece of my life rested. I placed small witness marks where only a locksmith would notice. A hair-thin strip of wax crossed the document cabinet. Graphite dusted the spare key bowl. A numbered seal covered the toolbox holding old house cylinders. By morning, all three had been disturbed. The spare key with the filed notch vanished again. The document seal was cut and pressed back into place. One old deadbolt cylinder was missing from the toolbox. Claire or Ben was not merely taking keys. They were studying the lock history and removing items that could identify when the hardware changed. I called the locksmith company, listed on a promotional card Claire had left near the phone. I asked whether someone had requested an estimate for my address. The dispatcher searched the schedule and found a residential rekey booked for Thanksgiving morning at 8:15. The customer name was Claire Pike. The billing card belonged to Hearthway Transition Services. The work order instructed the technician to replace all exterior cylinders, install a keypad, and provide no keys to the current occupant because a family safety transfer was underway. I asked whether the company had received proof of ownership or legal authority. The dispatcher said Claire promised to provide it at the appointment. I requested the work order number and thanked her. Then I called Ruth. Ruth wanted to send a cease and desist notice immediately. I asked her not to. Claire had already told the locksmith company when, where, and how she planned to remove me. If we stopped the appointment, she would choose a quieter method. If we documented it, June's deed would have the event it was written to recognize. Ruth did not like the risk. Neither did I. We agreed on conditions. Walter would watch the house. I would photograph the work. Ruth would remain available. If anyone entered by force or removed property before the lock change, we would call police. That same evening, Claire brought another folder. She said Meadow Glen had a Thanksgiving week opening and needed a refundable deposit to hold it. The application described me as cooperative, widowed, and ready to simplify. A typed signature appeared beside my name. I asked who had signed it. Claire looked directly at me and said, "You did when we discussed emergency housing." Ben stood behind her near the coat rack. His mouth opened, then closed. I had not signed the application, and both of them knew it. Claire placed a pen beside the final page. It authorized the residents to receive payment from the sale of my home. "This keeps everything smooth," she said. I closed the folder and returned it. "Smooth for whom?" I asked. Her patience broke for the first time. She said the senior housing investment was already committed, the sale had to close, and I was making a practical transition feel like betrayal. There it was, not concern, timing. Her project needed my house before my life was finished using it. Ben whispered that they should leave. Claire ignored him. She said I would thank her after 1 month at Meadow Glen. I asked whether she had toured the smallest unit. Her eyes shifted toward Ben. That told me they had already chosen one. After they left, I checked the Thanksgiving invitation Claire had sent to relatives. It listed my address, not hers. The dinner had never been moved. She had told me to go to her house so the family could gather inside mine while I stood somewhere else waiting. I printed the invitation and added it to the notebook. Then I polished my original key-packed June cemetery flowers and placed my phone charger beside my coat. On the kitchen counter, the blue roasting pan waited beneath a folded towel. The next morning, I found a new note taped to the refrigerator. Claire had written, "Please trust us. This will be easier if you do not fight." I read it once and put it in an evidence sleeve. Locks do not create ownership. They only control the next few inches of movement. Claire believed changing mine would settle the larger question. By Thanksgiving morning, she was about to learn that a locked door can also become a dated, photographed confession. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and cold, with rain dragging narrow lines down the kitchen windows. I left for June's grave at 7:30, carrying white chrysanthemums and a thermos of coffee. Before locking the door, I checked the blue roasting pan beneath its towel, the turkey in the refrigerator, and the original brass key in my pocket. At the cemetery, the grass had gone soft from 2 days of rain. I stood beside June's marker and told her the truth in pieces. Claire was pushing too hard. Ben was helping. The house no longer felt private. I did not tell June I planned to let the lock change happen. Even speaking to stone, I was ashamed of that choice. I stayed 20 minutes, then drove home by the long route through Sherman Hill. Walter had parked across the street with a newspaper folded on his steering wheel. At 8:19, he sent one word to my phone: van. By the time I turned onto my block, a white service vehicle sat in front of my house with its rear doors open. A technician in a red jacket carried a drill case up my porch steps. Claire stood beside him with the spare key she had taken from the pantry. Ben waited near the garage, looking down the street every few seconds. Through the dining room window, I saw relatives hanging coats on my hall tree, as if nothing unusual was happening. I parked 2 houses away and took photographs before anyone noticed me. The van logo, the license plate, the open work order on the dashboard, the keypad box on the porch floor. Then I recorded a short video showing the technician removing the original deadbolt while Claire watched and answered questions. The technician held up the old cylinder. "Do you want this retained?" he asked. Claire said no. Ben looked toward her, then toward the street. "Maybe we should keep it," he said. Claire answered without lowering her voice. "Dad loses keys. The old hardware is part of the problem." That sentence entered my file before the new lock entered my door. I stepped from behind Walter's car. The technician saw me first. His drill stopped. Claire turned with a smile that lasted only until she recognized the phone in my hand. "Dad, you are early," she said. The sentence would have sounded ordinary if she had not been changing my locks at the time. I asked the technician who authorized the work. He looked at Claire. She said she was the future owner and acting family coordinator. I asked whether he had seen a deed, power of attorney court order, or signed owner approval. His face tightened. "I was told documents were inside," he said. Claire stepped between us. "This is not a legal debate on Thanksgiving," she said. "You agreed to the safety plan. I asked her to show me where. She pointed toward the house and said the papers were being finalized. Finalized meant unsigned. Safety plan meant removal. Family coordinator meant daughter with a stolen key. I could have stopped the work then. I could have called Ruth, shown the technician my identification, and ordered him off the property. Instead, I looked at the half-installed keypad and made a decision that still troubles me. I let Claire finish proving exactly what she intended to do. The technician asked again whether I objected. I said, "Record that I have not authorized this work." He took out his phone, opened the job notes, and typed while Claire watched. Then I stepped back from the porch. Claire mistook restraint for surrender. People often do when they have never seen patience used professionally. At 8:46, the original deadbolt came free. At 8:52, the keypad frame covered the old screw holes. At 9:06, the technician programmed the first administrator code using Claire's initials. At 9:11, he handed her 2 new keys. None came to me. Ben stayed near the garage. When our eyes met, he rubbed his thumb across the edge of his wedding ring. I had seen him do that during difficult conversations with Claire. It meant he wanted to speak and had already decided not to. Fear does not excuse silence, but it leaves a recognizable posture. The technician packed the discarded cylinders into a cardboard box. I asked for them. Claire said the old hardware belonged to Hearthway because it had paid for the replacement. The technician hesitated, then placed the box in his van. That was another mistake. Locks removed from my house had just been carried away under a company name that did not own 1 brick. Relatives began arriving in larger numbers. My sister Ellen came with sweet potatoes. 2 cousins brought pies. Ben's brother carried folding chairs through the side gate. Claire greeted everyone warmly and told them I had gone to the wrong house first, but had found my way back. I heard her say it from 6 feet away. Ellen looked at me with immediate concern. "Gordon, are you all right?" she asked. I said I was standing in front of my home while my daughter changed the locks without permission. Ellen glanced at Claire, waiting for the version that sounded kinder. Claire gave it to her. She said I had forgotten recent conversations, misplaced keys, and become anxious about normal household matters. She said the new locks were temporary until I settled into Meadow Glen. Ben added that a professional assessment recommended supervision. He did not mention that his own company had paid for the assessment. A false story gains strength when each person contributes 1 careful sentence. Claire supplied concern. Ben supplied professional language. Kirk's report supplied paper. My age supplied the rest. By the time the first casserole entered my kitchen, the family had been given a complete explanation for why I should not enter after it. The technician closed his van. I asked for a copy of the invoice. Claire said she would handle it. I looked at the technician. "The owner is requesting the service record," I said. He printed a receipt from a small device clipped to his belt and handed it to me. The work order listed Claire as customer Hearthway as payer and my address as service location. Under reason for service, someone had typed unsafe elderly occupant, family possession transfer. The completion time was 9:18 on Thanksgiving morning. A better timestamp could not have been designed. Claire read the line over my shoulder and reached for the paper. I folded it once and placed it inside my coat. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "No," I replied. "I am making it easier to remember." The technician drove away before she could answer. Then Claire closed the front door. I waited on the porch and inserted my original key. It entered halfway, struck the new pins, and stopped. That simple resistance carried more meaning than any speech. For 37 years, I had repaired doors so lawful people could enter. My daughter had paid a stranger to make me unlawful at my own threshold. I knocked once. Claire opened the inner door, but left the chain fastened. Warm air carried turkey sage and browned butter through the narrow gap. Behind her, June's blue roasting pan rested on the stove. The chipped handle faced me like an old injury. "Open the chain," I said. Claire shook her head. "You need somewhere safer now." I asked who had decided that. She said the family, the assessor, and the senior living coordinator all agreed. The family had not been asked. The assessor had never witnessed danger. The coordinator was a company Ben had formed. I asked whether Ruth had reviewed any transfer papers. Claire said lawyers complicated simple transitions. Then she held up the release form and a pen. "Sign this and we can stop fighting," she said. "The paper would surrender my life estate." The new locks were not the conclusion. They were leverage. Ellen appeared behind Claire. "Gordon, perhaps you should sign and enjoy dinner," she said. I could hear embarrassment in her voice. She wanted the scene to end, not the truth, to win. That is how decent people sometimes help a wrong continue. They choose immediate peace over accurate discomfort. I told Ellen the paper concerned ownership, not dinner. Claire interrupted and said I no longer understood the difference. Several relatives had moved into the hallway. No one spoke. Ben stood near the dining room entrance, holding a carving knife pointed safely toward the floor. Claire lifted her chin. "This house will be mine anyway," she said. "We are only protecting it before you damage your future." There it was. My future had become the waiting room for her ownership. I looked at the people behind her and asked whether any of them had seen me agree to leave. No one answered. Claire answered for them. "They have seen enough," she said. Then she told everyone I had left the stove on twice, wandered outside after midnight, and forgotten my medication. Each claim was false. Each had been prepared. Kirk's report had turned invention into vocabulary. My right hand began to ache around the wet paper bag. I loosened my grip and counted the small screws visible on the keypad plate. 4 across the face. 2 beneath the cover. Counting hardware gave anger somewhere useful to go. I asked for my coat medication, personal papers, and June's pan. Claire passed my coat through the chained opening. Ben brought a grocery sack containing 2 prescription bottles, a toothbrush, and 3 shirts that were not mine. Whether the wrong shirts were carelessness or theater, I could not tell. Then I asked for the roasting pan. Claire looked back toward the kitchen. "It belongs with the house now," she said. The relatives heard her. Ben heard her. The phone in my coat recorded her. June's scarred blue pan had just been converted into evidence of intent. I did not argue. I photographed the lock keypad chainwork sticker and Claire standing behind the door. Then I asked one final question. "Are you refusing me entry to my residence?" Claire said, "Until you accept help, yes." Her answer was clear enough for a deed and cold enough for a daughter. The door closed. The bolt turned. Through the glass, I watched my family return to the dining room. Someone adjusted June's place setting so the empty chair would not appear empty. A moment later, conversation resumed. The ability of a room to continue after cruelty is one of the saddest things age teaches you. Walter crossed the street, holding an umbrella. He did not tell me to calm down or consider Claire's intentions. He picked up the wet cinnamon rolls from the bench and asked whether I wanted coffee. I said yes. A neighbor offered shelter while my family ate behind a lock I had once installed for them. At Walter's house, we sat at a small kitchen table beneath a clock that ticked too loudly. He warmed canned soup and cut the least damaged cinnamon roll in half. At noon, my phone received a smart lock invitation from Claire. It granted me temporary guest access beginning Monday at 10 and ending Monday at noon. She had reduced the owner of the house to a 2-hour visitor. I took screenshots of the invitation administrator name, device, serial number, and access window. Then I forwarded everything to Ruth with the locksmith invoice and my recording. Ruth called within 5 minutes. Her voice was flatter than usual. "Do not use the guest code," she said. "Do not sign the release. Do not send Claire a threat." I asked what she wanted me to do. Let the record speak before she learns what they say. We arranged to meet Miles at the county office on Monday. Until then, Walter offered his spare room. I accepted one night at a time. Pride wanted me back on my porch. Judgment kept me at his table. A locksmith knows the worst moment to force a door is when the frame already carries evidence of who damaged it. That afternoon, Claire sent a family message thanking everyone for supporting my transition. She included photographs of the dinner table, the turkey, and June's pan filled with stuffing. In one photograph, my empty chair had been removed entirely. The wall behind it looked clean, as though I had never sat there. I saved every image. Then I noticed a folder on the sideboard in the background. The cover bore the logo of Hawthorne Senior Living Partners. A yellow tab marked a page near the back. Printed across the tab were 2 words: closing authorization. Claire had not changed the locks only to move me out. She had used Thanksgiving to place the buyer's papers inside my home, surround herself with family witnesses, and prepare a sale she expected to complete before the next weekend. I enlarged the photograph until the letters blurred. Beside the folder lay my missing fireproof document case. Its combination dial faced upward. Someone had forced the latch. That was when I stopped hoping the lock change might be undone with an apology. I opened a clean page in my notebook and wrote the date, the time, and one sentence beneath them. Claire is no longer asking for the house. She is acting as if I am already gone. The Monday after Thanksgiving, Miles unlocked the county archive room before the public counter opened. The fluorescent lights hummed above rows of deed books and metal cabinets. Ruth stood beside me with a yellow pad, while Miles carried June's original filing to a reading table as carefully as if he were moving a sleeping child. He began with the recording stamp, then the legal description, then the life estate language that preserved my right to possess control and occupy the house until death or a voluntary written release. Miles traced each line with a wooden pencil. Nothing in the deed allowed Claire to manage the property because she expected to own it someday. The next page contained June's condition. It was not buried in fine print. It stood beneath its own heading and named 4 acts that would cancel Claire's future interest: coercing a release, blocking my access, taking possession before my death, or using false claims about my capacity to force a transfer. Miles tapped the phrase blocking access. "The lock change happened before the release," he said. "That is the mistake." Claire had reversed the order. She believed the new locks would pressure me into signing. Instead, the dated service record showed she had taken possession while my life estate remained active. Ruth asked Miles to explain what happened after forfeiture. He turned the final page toward us. June had named the Haven Door Housing Trust as substitute remainder beneficiary. The trust helped older homeowners facing displacement, predatory contracts, and family coercion. Claire would receive nothing from the house if the condition was proven. I read June's signature at the bottom. Her letters leaned forward as if they were still moving toward some task. I remembered her saying the condition only punished someone who did the thing. At the time, I had thought she was preparing for a remote possibility. Now the possibility had changed my locks and served dinner in my kitchen. Miles opened the release Claire wanted me to sign. It stated that I had received independent legal advice from Ruth, that no pressure had been used, and that I was surrendering possession because I could no longer live safely alone. Every important sentence was false before my name reached the bottom. The signature line carried a faint indentation beneath it. Someone had placed another sheet over the page and practiced the first stroke of my name. I tilted the paper under the lamp, 3 shallow versions of the letter G pressed into the fibers. A locksmith spends years studying marks left by pressure. Paper remembers hands, too. Ruth photographed the indentations and sealed the release in an evidence sleeve. Then she called the title company handling Friday's closing. The closer, a woman named Paula Greer, confirmed that Claire had delivered a scanned release 2 days before Thanksgiving. The scan already carried what appeared to be my signature. Paula sent the file through a secure portal. My name sat at the bottom in dark blue ink. It looked better than the typed utility signature and worse than the false access request. The final stroke rose too high. The date beside it was Thanksgiving morning at 9:30, 12 minutes after the locksmith finished the job. According to the notary block I had signed inside my house, before a woman named Elise Crane. At 9:30, I had been standing on the porch photographing the keypad. Walter's door camera showed me crossing the street at 9:27. Claire's family photographs showed Elise nowhere inside the house. Miles searched the state notary registry. Elise Crane's commission had expired 8 months earlier. Her listed address matched the office suite used by Hathaway Transition Services. The same shell company had paid Kirk Danner, ordered the locks, and booked my room at Meadow Glen. Its fingerprints were appearing on every door Claire had tried to close around me. Ruth called Elise. The number went to voicemail. She left no details, only a request that Elise contact counsel regarding a deed release bearing her seal. 9 minutes later, Ben called me. He asked where I was and whether I had visited the county office. I gave him no answer. Ben filled the silence with nervous breathing, then claimed he was only checking whether I needed lunch. His question told us Claire already knew someone had touched the file. Ruth asked Miles whether the title request system recorded account activity. It did. The morning Claire changed my locks, a user connected to Hathaway downloaded the deed index, but not the full deed image. They had seen Claire's future interest and missed June's condition. That was the real mistake beneath the lock change. Claire built her plan from an index summary. It said life estate to Gordon Pike, remainder to Claire Pike Hollis. She assumed the word remainder meant delayed ownership. She never ordered the complete instrument until after taking possession. By then, the act that canceled her interest had already been photographed and invoiced. Ruth requested preservation of every search upload message and payment tied to the closing. Paula placed a formal fraud hold on the file, but agreed not to notify Claire until counsel completed review. The closing calendar would remain visible. Claire would continue believing only my signature stood between her and the sale proceeds. Next, we examined the buyer. Hawthorne Senior Living Partners had been formed 4 months earlier. Its public brochure promised dignified downsizing for older homeowners. Its registered office was a mailbox beside a shipping store. The managing member was a private investment company called North Ark Ventures. North Ark belonged to Claire. She had not arranged an ordinary sale to an independent buyer. She was moving my house into a company she controlled using borrowed money, then planning to lease it as executive housing for her senior living project. The purchase price would pay her debts. The property itself would remain within reach. The loan application valued the house at $510,000 after renovation. Hawthorne planned to buy it from me for $380,000, then refinance after my life estate disappeared. Claire expected to capture the difference while describing the transaction as protection for an aging father. Ruth found another layer. Hawthorne had received a bridge loan from Prairie Union Credit. The loan required proof that the house would be vacant at closing. Claire submitted the Meadow Glen Reservation Kirk safety report and a statement from Ben claiming I had voluntarily moved out before Thanksgiving. Walter's home camera showed otherwise. So did my pharmacy receipt cemetery visit and lock photographs. I had not moved. I had been removed. Every document Claire created to show a smooth transition now connected the lender title company care residence and locksmith to one timed plan. The paperwork did not describe concern. It described coordination. Miles printed the smart lock registration. Claire had activated the device at 9/6 on Thanksgiving morning and named the location June House. She created guest access for me only after the title company requested proof of possession. The 2-hour code was not kindness. It was an attempt to make the lockout look temporary. The access log showed 12 entries between Thursday and Sunday. Claire entered 6 times. Ben entered 4. Elise Crane entered once late Friday evening. The final entry belonged to a code labeled appraiser. Someone had already inspected my home for the refinance before the first sale legally closed. Ruth requested the locksmith company's service packet. The technician Aaron Mills had written that the current owner appeared during installation and denied authorization. Claire instructed him to continue claiming an emergency family transfer. Aaron had also photographed my identification after I requested the invoice. His notes mattered because they removed Claire's favorite defense. She could not say she believed I had consented. The technician had recorded my objection while the hardware was still being installed. Claire heard it, overruled it, and accepted the keys anyway. Her own service order showed that the lockout continued after she knew the lawful occupant objected. Aaron also preserved the removed cylinders. Company policy required 30 days of storage before disposal when ownership was disputed. My original deadbolt side door cylinder and garage lock sat inside a sealed box labeled with the work number. The physical locks carried tool marks from the unauthorized removal. By noon, Ruth's conference table held 4 separate chains of proof. The deed established my right. The lock records established interference. The title file established attempted transfer. The capacity documents established coercion. None depended on my daughter admitting what she had done. That was the first moment I felt the ground beneath me stop moving. That mattered more than I expected. A part of me still wanted Claire to walk into the room, see the papers, and become the child who once waited beside my workbench for a key to be cut. Evidence does not return people to who they were. It only stops them from deciding who you are. I had spent weeks asking myself whether I was being too suspicious. The table answered without emotion. Ruth called the Haven Door Housing Trust. Its director, Leah Monroe, had known June through a church housing committee. June had volunteered there twice a month for 3 years without telling me much about the cases. Leah remembered her carrying folders for widows whose children wanted quick signatures. Leah said June had added the trust to our deed after meeting a man who spent Christmas in a motel because his son changed the locks before probate. She said a future inheritance should never become an eviction notice. Leah told me I had to look away from the window before answering. June had carried other people's papers while quietly preparing one that might someday protect me. The trust agreed to accept the future interest if the forfeiture condition was confirmed. It also agreed to preserve my lifetime possession without rent supervision or interference. June had chosen a beneficiary that would protect my home without trying to manage my life. That difference was the entire heart of the deed. Ruth prepared an emergency petition for declaratory relief, restoration of possession, and preservation of evidence. She included the deed Thanksgiving photographs, Aaron's work notes, the guest code invitation, Kirk's report, and the forged release. The filing asked a judge to recognize that Claire's remainder interest had been forfeited. We did not file it immediately. Ruth wanted one more thing: a direct connection between Claire and the false signature. The scan metadata showed the release had been created on a tablet registered to Hathaway. Ben managed the company, but Claire could still blame him for the upload. We needed proof of who directed the false release, not merely whose device carried it. At 2:15, Elise Crane returned Ruth's call. Her voice shook. She said she had never watched me sign anything. Claire brought the completed release to Hathaway's office and asked Elise to stamp it as a favor. Claire claimed I had signed at breakfast, but was too embarrassed to appear before a notary. Elise admitted her commission had expired. Claire told her the title company only needed the stamp image and promised the document would be replaced at closing. In exchange, Hawthorne paid Elise $6,000 for relocation consulting work she had never performed. The invoice described 3 days of services. Elise admitted she had done none. Ruth asked whether Elise would provide a sworn statement. She said yes, but only if her attorney attended. That was reasonable. People become careful when a favor turns into evidence. Ruth scheduled the meeting for Tuesday morning and told Elise not to contact Claire. Elise agreed, then asked whether the county could protect her records before Hathaway removed them. 10 minutes later, Claire called my regular phone. Her voice was warm. She said she regretted how Thanksgiving had felt and wanted to give me time inside the house on Tuesday. She also reminded me that Friday's closing would secure my care and protect the family's future. Her tone was tender enough to make the sale sound like a holiday gift. I asked what would happen if I refused to sign. Claire paused, then said, "The court could confirm what the professionals already knew." "You can do this with dignity, Dad," she said. The phrase was meant as mercy. It sounded like a threat with good posture. Ruth raised one finger, reminding me not to challenge the lie while Claire was still explaining it. I told her I was tired and needed to think. She softened at once. Claire said she could bring the release to Meadow Glen and help guide my hand if arthritis made signing difficult. Ruth wrote those words down as I listened. My daughter had just offered to physically guide the hand she claimed was too impaired to decide. Then Claire made the offer we needed. She said Ben would pick me up Tuesday morning, take me home for personal belongings, and drive me to meet the title closer afterward. If I cooperated, the family would tell everyone Thanksgiving had been a misunderstanding. Claire was not offering to correct the lie. She was offering to reward me for helping preserve it. I agreed to the visit, but not the signing. Claire heard what she wanted. Before ending the call, she said the blue roasting pan would be packed with my kitchen things. I looked at Ruth. My daughter was offering to return my wife's pan in exchange for my house. Ruth's expression did not change, but she drew a box around the time of the call. After the call, Ruth filed the emergency petition under seal. A judge scheduled a private review for Wednesday afternoon and issued a preservation order covering the smart lock records, title file, Hathaway accounts, and all property inside my home. The order also barred any new signatures from being treated as voluntary until the court reviewed them. The order remained unserved for the moment. Claire still believed the closing would occur Friday. Ruth wanted her to bring the release, explain the transaction, and identify every person she expected to benefit. Iowa allowed me to record a conversation I participated in, but Ruth prepared a written notice anyway. Before leaving the county office, Miles returned June's deed to its protective sleeve. He pressed the cover flat and looked at me over his glasses. "Most people think a deed tells you who gets a house," he said. "Your wife used one to tell the house who was allowed to stay human." His hand remained on the deed cover for a moment before he released it. I carried the certified copy beneath my coat. Outside, sleet clicked against the courthouse steps. My hand hurt around the folder, but I did not loosen it. On Tuesday morning, Ben would unlock my door, and Claire would place the forged release in front of me. What neither of them knew was that June's condition had already turned every new key against them. Tuesday morning, Ben arrived at Walter's house at 9:10 in a gray sedan I had never seen before. He did not come to the door. He waited at the curb with both hands on the steering wheel and the engine running. I carried one empty suitcase, June's certified deed copy, and a recorder inside my coat pocket. The written recording notice rested on top of the suitcase. Ruth had prepared it in plain language. Any conversation about my residence property accounts or transfer papers could be preserved for accuracy. Ben read it before we left. His eyes stopped at the final line, then moved toward my coat as if he could hear the recorder through wool. "I am not signing as a witness," he said. I told him he was not being asked to witness anything. He only needed to acknowledge that the conversation might be recorded. Ben signed with a hand that shook enough to leave a small hook at the end of his name. We drove toward my house without music. The street still carried piles of brown leaves pushed against curbs by the Thanksgiving rain. Halfway there, Ben asked whether I had spoken with Ruth. I said I always spoke with Ruth before signing property papers. He rubbed his wedding ring with his thumb and stared through the windshield. "Claire thinks lawyers turn family matters into wars," he said. I looked at the houses passing beside us. "Lawyers usually arrive after somebody starts taking things," I replied. Ben breathed out through his nose, but said nothing else until we reached my block. The new keypad glowed blue above the deadbolt. Ben entered a code without looking at the numbers, which meant he had used it often. The access log would show every visit, but habit told its own story. He opened the door and stepped aside. "You have 2 hours," he said. I stood on the threshold and waited. Ben looked confused. Then he remembered I no longer had a valid key. He held the door wider, and I entered my own home as a guest. The air smelled of furniture polish and the artificial cinnamon Claire used in plug-in warmers. June had hated those things. She said a house should smell like what happened inside it. In the dining room, cardboard boxes lined the wall beneath June's china cabinet. Each carried a printed label: Gordon Keep, Gordon Donate, Estate Sale. Claire had sorted my belongings before I signed away the right to decide what happened to them. The blue roasting pan sat inside the Gordon Keep box beneath 2 bath towels. Grease remained along the rim from Thanksgiving dinner. Claire had not washed it the way June always did. I lifted it carefully, feeling the chipped handle beneath my palm, and placed it inside the suitcase. I walked through the first floor while the recorder captured the changes. My personal papers were missing from the desk. The fireproof document case had been forced and left beneath the guest room bed. My medication list had been replaced by a typed page carrying Claire's contact information. Inside the kitchen, 3 utility bills were clipped to a folder marked Transition Complete. The electric, water, and gas accounts all showed Claire as the primary contact. A handwritten note beside them said, "Cancel after Friday closing." The date and handwriting were hers. I photographed the page. Ben stepped closer. "That was only planning," he said. I asked whether planning usually required removing the owner first. He lowered his voice. "She believed you would never leave if she asked normally." The sentence hung between us. I turned toward him, so she stopped asking. Ben looked away. "She thought the project would fail," he said. "She thought everyone would lose everything." I asked who everyone meant. He answered with names from their investment group, not one person from my house. Claire arrived at 10:12, carrying coffee and the leather folder. She wore a camel-colored coat and the calm expression of someone entering a meeting she expected to control. She saw the recorder notice on the dining table and read it without asking permission. "You are turning this into evidence," she said. I sat down slowly and rested my right hand beside the folder. "I am turning it into an accurate conversation." Claire removed her coat. "Fine. Accuracy may help you understand later." She signed the notice. Then she placed the release form, Meadow Glen agreement, and closing instructions in front of me. Yellow tabs marked 4 signature lines. My name had already been printed beneath each one. Claire positioned a thick black pen beside my hand. I told her I was tired of conflict and willing to consider moving. Her shoulders loosened. She said that was the first sensible thing I had said in weeks. Ben glanced at the recorder, then at her, but she had already begun speaking with the confidence of someone who believed the hard part was over. Claire explained that Hawthorne would buy the house on Friday. The proceeds would pay for my lifetime care at Meadow Glen, clear temporary project debt, and preserve the remaining value inside a family investment. She described each use as if all 3 served me equally. I asked how much of the sale would enter my account. Claire said direct payment might affect planning and benefits, so Hawthorne would manage the funds through Hearthway. I had no benefits affected by the sale. She was creating a reason my own money should never reach me. "What does Hearthway receive?" I asked. Claire opened another page. The company would charge a transition fee, property coordination fee, placement fee, document fee, and family management fee. Together, they totaled more than $80,000. Ben shifted in his chair. I asked who owned Hearthway. Claire said it was a service company created for convenience. "Owned by whom?" I repeated. She looked toward Ben. "Ben manages it," she replied. Ben's face changed. Management was not ownership. Ruth had already found the formation documents, but I wanted the answer spoken. I asked whether Claire held the controlling membership. She said ownership structure was irrelevant because the company existed to protect the family. "Which family member receives the fees?" I asked. Claire's patience thinned. "You are receiving care. We are receiving reimbursement for work," she said. "Nobody is stealing from you." I looked around at the labeled boxes, the new keypad, and the release form. "Then why am I inside under a time limit?" She leaned forward. "Because when you have open access, you interfere with every step." There it was. Not safety, interference. Claire said the lock change had been necessary to keep me from removing papers canceling services or frightening the buyer before closing. I asked whether she changed the locks before she held a signed release. Claire answered without hesitation. "Of course. We could not wait until the last minute." Ben closed his eyes. The recorder kept running. I asked whether she knew I had objected during installation. Claire said my objection did not matter because I was not thinking clearly. The deed only delays ownership, she said. It does not give you the right to sabotage the asset. I touched the first yellow tab but did not sign. What if the title company discovers the release already carries my name? I asked. Claire's eyes moved toward Ben. That copy was provisional, she said. This one replaces it. I asked who signed the provisional copy. She crossed her arms. We used your prior authorization to complete the file. There had been no prior authorization. I asked whether Elise Crane watched me sign. Claire said Elise verified the circumstances and did what was needed. Ben stood so quickly his chair legs scraped the floor. Claire, stop, he said. She turned toward him. Sit down. Ben remained standing. You said the first copy would never be used. Claire's face hardened. It was not used. It held the closing slot. Ben looked at me. She uploaded it, he said. I told her the signature did not match. Claire told him he was confused about the sequence. He shook his head. No. I watched you trace it from the utility form. The room went quiet. A delivery truck passed outside, rattling the front windows. Claire stared at her husband as if he had become a stranger in the middle of a sentence. Ben is under pressure, she said. He has been sleeping badly. She was using the same language on him that she had used on me. Ben heard it too. His hand dropped from his wedding ring. I asked where the original digital file was stored. Ben said on the Hearthway tablet and a backup drive inside their home office. Claire told him to leave. He did not. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed a folded receipt on the table. It was the locksmith invoice showing Claire's card authorization, the work notes, and the instruction to deny keys to the current occupant. I already had a copy, but this one contained a handwritten line from Ben. Owner objected before completion. Claire said, continue. Claire looked at him. You kept that. Ben said he kept everything after she told him he would carry the blame if the sale failed. The fear in his voice was not noble. It was self-preservation. Still, self-preservation had finally pointed him toward truth. He placed 2 more items on the table. The Meadow Glen application with my forged electronic signature, and an email chain between Claire Elise and Paula Greer arranging Friday's closing. In one message, Claire wrote that I would sign once I understood the door would not reopen without cooperation. I read the sentence aloud. Claire did not deny writing it. She said I was ignoring context. The door was leverage, I replied. You called it safety. Claire said leverage was sometimes necessary when an elderly parent became stubborn. Ben sat again, but he moved his chair away from hers. He told me Claire had planned the Thanksgiving lockout for 6 weeks. The family dinner was meant to create witnesses who could later say I had been offered help and refused it publicly. The wrong shirts in my grocery bag had been deliberate. Claire wanted relatives to see Ben packing for me, so the transition looked underway. The temporary guest code had been created only because the title Closer asked whether I still had access. I asked about the fireproof case. Ben admitted forcing it open with a pry bar. Claire told him June's full deed copy had to be removed before I found the condition. But the case contained only tax papers and an older deed summary. The county retained the complete instrument they had failed to read. Claire stood and began gathering the papers. This meeting is over, she said. I placed my hand on the forged release. This belongs to me. She reached for it. Ben put his palm over the folder before she could take it. For a moment, husband and wife looked at each other across my dining table. Claire told him to remember who had paid their mortgage when he lost his job. Ben said he remembered. He also remembered who would go to jail if every signature remained under his company name. The word jail changed the air. Claire sat down again. She lowered her voice and offered me new terms. If I signed, Hawthorne would raise the price by $40,000. Hathaway would waive half its fees. I could choose any unit at Meadow Glen and keep June's pan. My daughter had reached the bargaining stage. A house, a life estate, and my dignity had become numbers she believed could be adjusted until consent appeared. I closed the suitcase around the blue pan. "You are offering me my own belongings as payment," I said. Claire looked at the recorder. "I am offering peace." I asked what happened if I refused. She said the safety petition would proceed, the court would review Kirk's report, and temporary control would be granted before winter. "You will move either way," she said. I let several seconds pass. Then I told her I would attend Friday's closing and give my final decision there. Claire studied my face, trying to decide whether exhaustion had finally done what pressure had not. She agreed, but only if I stayed away from the house until then. I said I would comply. That answer restored her confidence. She collected the unsigned Meadow Glen pages and left the forged release on the table by mistake. Ben noticed, but said nothing. Claire took the service folder and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned toward me. "Wear the navy suit Friday. People trust you in that one," she said. She wanted the man she had called incompetent to look respectable while surrendering his home. I nodded, as though the choice of suit mattered. The keypad chirped when she exited. Ben remained inside. He waited until her car pulled away, then removed a small black drive from his shoe and set it beside the recorder. It contained Hathaway emails, smart lock exports, title uploads, and North Arc financial files. "I copied it last night," he said. I asked why. Ben looked toward the boxed belongings along the wall. "Because Claire said if anything went wrong, every document would show I did it. He was not saving me first. He was saving himself. Honesty that begins in fear can still become evidence." Ben told me Hawthorne's bridge lender had required a personal guarantee from both of them. If Friday's closing failed, North Arc would owe more than $600,000 within 10 business days. Claire believed my signature was the only remaining obstacle. He also revealed that several relatives had invested small amounts after Claire promised the house was already under family control. Friday's closing would include those relatives, the title officer, a Prairie Union representative, Claire's project partners, and the Meadow Glen director. The room she had built to display my surrender would contain everyone who needed to hear the truth. I asked Ben whether he would attend. He said Claire expected him there as Hathaway manager. Then he asked whether Ruth could protect him. I told him Ruth protected facts, not people who waited until the last minute. He nodded. "That is fair," he said. It was the first fair sentence I had heard from him. We left the house at 11:58. Ben locked the door behind us and canceled the temporary code from his phone. I photographed the screen. Then I carried June's roasting pan across the street to Walter's house while Ben drove away alone. Ruth and Miles were waiting inside. Walter closed the curtains and we connected Ben's drive to a clean computer. Folder after folder appeared. Closing scripts, forged forms, investor promises, fee schedules, a document labeled Family Narrative. Inside that document, Claire had written the exact phrases relatives should use if anyone questioned my move. Gordon forgets appointments. Gordon fears ordinary repairs. Gordon agreed before Thanksgiving. Gordon becomes angry when corrected. At the bottom, one final instruction appeared in bold type. At closing, do not let him speak before the release is signed. Ruth read it once, then looked at me. She has chosen the room, she said. I placed the blue roasting pan on Walter's kitchen table and opened June's deed beside it. Friday morning, Claire expected me to sit quietly, sign 4 pages, and disappear from the title. Instead, every person she had recruited would watch the deed decide who had lost the right to the house. Friday morning, the title office smelled of coffee printer toner and the cinnamon air freshener someone had clipped beneath the reception desk. I wore the navy suit Claire requested. June had chosen it for our 40th anniversary dinner. The sleeves felt tighter than I remembered, but the shoulders still sat straight. Walter drove me downtown and waited in the parking lot. I carried the blue roasting pan inside a plain canvas bag. Ruth walked beside me with June's certified deed, the sealed evidence folders, and the emergency court order that had been signed at 7:45 that morning. The closing room had glass walls and a long walnut table. Claire sat at the far end beneath a screen displaying a photograph of my house. Ben occupied the chair beside her, though a full foot of space separated them. Paula Greer, the title closer, arranged documents into neat stacks marked seller, buyer, lender, and residence. Claire had invited 14 people. Ellen sat beside 2 cousins who had invested in North Ark. Kirk Danner represented the supposed safety assessment. The Meadow Glen director held a welcome folder with my name printed across the cover. A representative from Prairie Union Credit sat near the door with a laptop and a sealed envelope. Miles Avery stood behind Ruth. Claire noticed him and frowned. "Why is the county notary here?" she asked. Paula said Miles had been invited to verify the original deed record. Claire looked toward Ruth, then at me. Her smile returned, but the muscles around it had tightened. She crossed the room and adjusted my tie without permission. "Today can still be peaceful," she whispered. "Just follow Paula's instructions." I stepped back and straightened the tie myself. "I came to hear every instruction," I said. Claire interpreted that as cooperation. At 9 o'clock, Paula closed the glass doors. She explained that the transaction involved the voluntary release of my life estate sale of the property to Hawthorne Senior Living Partners and placement of proceeds into a managed transition plan. Each phrase sounded clean enough to eat from. Claire thanked the relatives for supporting a difficult family decision. She said my grief had made independent living unsafe and that moving me before winter was an act of love. Then she looked toward me with damp eyes and told the room I had finally accepted help. Ellen reached for my hand. "We only want you safe," she said. I asked whether she had ever heard me agree to sell. Her fingers paused above mine. Claire answered for her. "Dad, we discussed this many times. You just do not remember every conversation." The first lie had entered the record. Ruth glanced at Paula. The closer started the meeting recorder and stated the date, time, and names present. Claire had wanted witnesses. Ruth had made sure they would become accurate ones. Paula opened the seller packet and placed the release form in front of me. The yellow signature tab waited beneath the statement that I was acting voluntarily after independent legal advice. Ruth moved the pen away before I touched it. "My client has a few questions before execution," she said. Claire sighed. Ruth, this is exactly why we kept attorneys out until closing. Ruth turned one page. You kept the attorney named in the document out of the process. That is different. Paula asked Claire when I had received independent advice. Claire said Ruth had reviewed the estate plan years earlier and that the release followed the same intent. Ruth placed a letter on the table. It stated she had never advised me to surrender the life estate and had first seen the current release on Monday. The Prairie Union representative typed something into her laptop. Claire said the misunderstanding was technical. Gordon understands the purpose. She replied. I looked at Paula. Ask me, I said. Paula asked whether I wanted to release my right to live in and control the property. No, I answered. The room became still. Claire leaned forward, as if volume might repair the answer. Dad, you agreed to complete this today. I agreed to attend, I said. Claire's face changed, then recovered. She told Paula I was becoming overwhelmed. Kirk Danner opened his folder and said confusion during major transitions was common. Ruth asked whether he had ever observed me unable to understand a document. Kirk said his report reflected family history and environmental risk. Ruth placed the recorded call transcript beside him. It contained his admission that he had never seen me wander miss medication, leave the stove on, or become disoriented. He read 2 lines and stopped. I relied on information provided by the family, he said. Which family member paid you? Ruth asked. Kirk looked toward Claire. Hearthway Transition Services. Ben lowered his head. Claire said payment did not change professional findings. Ruth slid the Hearthway formation record across the table. It showed Claire as controlling member and Ben as manager. Kirk's supposed independent assessment had been purchased by the company that would collect more than $80,000 from my move. One of the cousins shifted in his chair. He had invested $25,000 in North Ark. Claire, you said Hearthway was an outside service, he said. Claire replied that the ownership structure had been simplified for tax purposes. Her words came faster now. Ruth opened the first evidence folder. She placed the utility authorization forms, account change logs, and bank access request in a row. Each carried my electronic signature. Each originated from Claire's home network. Dana Webb's letter confirmed that my payment history showed no need for management. Claire said I had asked her to handle routine matters after June died. I asked her to identify the date email or written authorization. She could not. Instead, she told the room that grieving parents often forgot informal agreements. Then I removed my notebook from the canvas bag. I placed it on the table beside the forms. Every entry carried a date-time company and witness. The first page described Claire's emergency planning folder. The last described the lockout. Paula turned several pages while the room listened to paper move beneath her fingers. Claire stared at the notebook. You were documenting your own family, she said. I looked at the forged signatures. My family was documenting me first, I replied. Ruth opened the second folder. Aaron Mills's service order went down first. It named Claire as customer, Hearthway as payer, and my address as the location of an unsafe elderly occupant. Beneath it sat Aaron's handwritten note that I appeared during installation and denied permission. The screen displayed my photographs from Thanksgiving morning, the service van, the open work order, the removed deadbolt, the keypad administrator screen carrying Claire's initials. Then came the time-stamped video of me asking that my objection be recorded. Claire watched herself instruct Aaron to continue. Ellen covered her mouth. Ben's brother whispered, "You told us Gordon had already moved." Claire said the lock change had been temporary and necessary to prevent a crisis. Ruth displayed the smart lock log, showing that I had been given only 2 hours of guest access 4 days later. Paula asked why a lawful resident needed guest access to his own home. Claire said the title was complicated. Miles spoke for the first time. "The title is not complicated," he said. "The conduct is." Claire turned toward him. "You are a records clerk, not the judge of my family." Miles remained calm. "I am the notary who witnessed your mother's deed. I know what was filed." Before he opened it, Ruth played my Thanksgiving recording. The room heard Claire say I needed somewhere safer. They heard her refuse me entry. They heard her call my objection irrelevant. Then came the sentence about June's pan. "It belongs with the house now." I opened the canvas bag and placed the blue enamel pan on the table. The chipped handle faced Claire. Grease still marked one edge because I had not cleaned away the final Thanksgiving she served without me. No one spoke. Claire looked at the pan as though it had betrayed her. "This is theater," she said. "He is using Mom's things to punish me." I rested my hand on the chipped handle. "You used it while I stood outside," I replied. Ruth opened the third folder. The forged release appeared on the screen beside the unsigned original. The false signature carried a Thanksgiving timestamp of 9:30. Walter's door camera showed me across the street at that moment. Aaron's service record placed Claire at my house. Elise Crane entered from the adjoining conference room with her attorney. Claire's face emptied. Elise stated that she had not witnessed my signature, that her notary commission had expired, and that Claire paid her $6,000 through Hawthorne for a stamp image and false verification. Claire stood. She is lying to save herself. Paula asked her to sit. Claire remained standing and pointed toward Ben. He handled Hearthway. He prepared every upload. Ben looked at her for several seconds. Then he opened the folder in front of him and removed the original locksmith receipt, the Meadow Glen application, and a printed email chain. "I handled what you told me to handle," he said. His voice shook, but it carried. Claire told him to stop. Ben continued. "He admitted forming Hearthway, paying Kirk, forcing open my document case, and submitting the residence deposit. Then he said Claire traced my signature, directed Elise, and ordered the Thanksgiving lock change before any release existed. Ruth asked whether he had proof. Ben placed the black backup drive on the table. Emails, tablet files, smart lock exports, and the draft signatures, he said. The Prairie Union representative closed her laptop and opened the sealed envelope beside it. She informed Claire that the lender had completed a preliminary fraud review. The bridge loan had been based on false representations that I had voluntarily vacated and signed the release. Prairie Union was freezing all undisbursed funds and reserving its right to accelerate the debt. Claire looked around the room for support. Her investors avoided her eyes. The Meadow Glen director quietly closed my welcome folder. Kirk gathered his papers, but Paula reminded him the meeting record was still active. The first mask had fallen. Claire reached for the second. She said Ben had manipulated the files because he feared losing the project. She described herself as a daughter trying to solve a painful problem while an unstable husband made bad decisions. Ben's face reddened. "You said if this failed, every signature would point to me," he replied. Claire answered, "Because you signed them." The sentence landed harder than she expected. Ben nodded once as if a final private question had been answered. "Then I will explain why," he said. He gave Paula the document labeled Family Narrative. The screen showed Claire's prepared phrases. Gordon forgets appointments. Gordon fears ordinary repairs. Gordon agreed before Thanksgiving. Gordon becomes angry when corrected. Ellen began crying. She said Claire had sent those exact phrases in a family email before the holiday. Another cousin confirmed receiving them. One by one, the relatives understood they had not been witnesses to my decline. They had been rehearsed participants in Claire's version of it. Claire sat down at last. She turned toward me and lowered her voice. "Dad, we can still settle this privately." She offered to cancel Meadow Glen, return the house, and pay me $100,000 from the refinancing. In exchange, I would sign a new release later and tell everyone grief had caused a misunderstanding. The second mask had fallen too. Concern had become negotiation. I asked where the $100,000 would come from. Claire said the house held enough equity for everyone. Everyone, I repeated. She closed her eyes for a moment, then said I was being cruel. Ruth looked at Miles. It was time. Miles placed June's original deed beneath the document camera. The first page appeared on the screen. He identified the recording number, legal description, life estate, and remainder interest. Then he turned to the condition June had added. He read it slowly. Any remainder beneficiary who blocked my access, attempted possession, before my death, coerced a release, or used false incapacity claims would forfeit all future interest. The replacement beneficiary was Haven Door Housing Trust. Claire stared at the screen. "That cannot be enforceable," she said. Ruth placed 3 Iowa case summaries and the morning's court order beside the deed. The judge had found sufficient evidence to preserve my possession, halt the closing, and begin determination of forfeiture. Then Ruth read the final paragraph. Because the lockout was documented before any valid release, Claire's act had triggered the deed's condition. Her future interest was no longer an asset Hawthorne could purchase, pledge, or refinance. Claire looked toward Paula. "He can still sign it back to me," she said. Miles shook his head. "The deed did not transfer the forfeited interest to me. It redirected that interest to Haven Door. I retained my life estate. The trust now stood next in line." Leah Monroe entered from the hallway and introduced herself as Haven Door's director. She accepted the substitute remainder interest subject to court confirmation and stated the trust would preserve my lifetime right without rent supervision or family control. Claire's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time that morning, no prepared sentence waited for her. I looked at the new keypad photograph on the screen, then at my daughter. "You locked me out before the deed let you in," I said. She turned toward Ben. "Fix this," she whispered. He shook his head. "There is nothing left to sign." Paula marked the closing canceled. She voided every seller document and sealed the file for investigators. Prairie Union delivered formal notice of default to North Ark and Hawthorne. The lender representative explained that the personal guarantees could expose Claire and Ben to more than $600,000 plus fees and losses. Claire stood again. This time anger arrived without disguise. She said June had poisoned the deed against her. She said the house should belong to her after everything she had done for us. She said I was wasting family wealth on strangers. Leah opened a thin folder. It contained June's volunteer records with Haven Door. For 3 years, my wife had helped older residents recover documents, contest fraudulent liens, and return home after family lockouts. The trust was not made of strangers to her. Claire looked at June's signature on the volunteer forms. Her anger lost direction. "Mom never told me," she said. "She did not trust you with this," I replied. It was the hardest sentence I spoke that day, and the one I wished were false. Ruth handed her the emergency order. It required immediate restoration of my possession return of keys and personal property preservation of all devices and no contact regarding signatures or money without counsel. Violating it could result in contempt. Claire read the first page and dropped it on the table. "You plan to humiliate me," she said. I folded June's deed copy and placed it beside the roasting pan. "You planned the room," I replied. "I brought the record." 2 investigators from the county attorney's elder exploitation unit entered through the glass doors. They did not arrest anyone in front of the family. They served preservation notices and requested that Claire Benelise and Kirk remain available for interviews. Claire asked whether she needed a lawyer. One investigator said that was her decision. Ruth reminded everyone that no documents or devices could be destroyed. Ben immediately surrendered his phone and the Hearthway tablet password. Claire held her phone against her chest. Then Ellen stood and crossed the room. For one foolish second, I thought she might comfort her. Instead, my sister held out her hand. "Give it to them," Ellen said. "You used all of us." Claire looked around the closing table. The relatives who had arrived to witness my surrender were now watching her refuse a lawful order. Slowly, she placed the phone in an evidence bag. Walter texted me from the parking lot asking whether I needed him inside. I wrote back that I was coming out soon. The house was still legally mine to occupy. The locks were still physically changed. Both facts would be corrected before sunset. As Paula ended the recording, Ben leaned toward Ruth and said there was another account investigators needed to find. Claire had moved part of the bridge loan through a custodial fund created from money June left for future grandchildren. There had never been grandchildren. Ruth asked how much remained. Ben swallowed. "Almost none," he said. "She used the rest to keep Hawthorne alive." I looked at Claire. The canceled house sale was no longer the deepest theft in the room. June had left money for children who might someday exist, and our daughter had spent it before they ever had a name. The investigators found the custodial account before sunset. June had opened it 9 years earlier, after Claire mentioned wanting children someday. She placed $120,000 into a conservative fund and named future descendants as beneficiaries. Until then, the money was to remain untouched, except for education or medical needs approved by an independent trustee. Claire knew the account existed. She also knew the trustee, a retired accountant named Samuel Reed, had died the previous spring. Before a replacement could be appointed, she submitted documents claiming authority through June's estate. The signature on the authorization was mine. It was false. The first withdrawal paid North Ark's interest bill. The second covered Hearthway's office lease. The third paid the deposit at Meadow Glen in my name. By Thanksgiving, less than $8,000 remained. Claire had used money intended for children who might never be born to remove the father who already existed. Ruth read the transaction list without changing her expression. I had learned that her calm became sharper as the facts worsened. She placed each page into a separate sleeve and wrote the source date and account number across the seal. "This is no longer only a property dispute," she said. Ben confirmed the transfers. He had processed 2 of them after Claire said the trustee vacancy created a temporary opening. He claimed she promised to restore the money when the house sold. That explanation did not help him. Borrowing without permission is still theft when the borrower prepares the repayment from someone else's home. Claire gave her formal interview 2 days later. She arrived with a criminal attorney and a written statement describing herself as overwhelmed by debt grief and responsibility for an aging parent. She admitted changing the locks, but called it an emergency safeguard. She admitted using the fund, but called it a bridge. She denied tracing my signature until investigators showed her the tablet file containing 3 practice versions beneath the final image. Then she blamed Ben for encouraging shortcuts. Ben's attorney produced their message history. In one exchange, he warned that the deed needed full review before any lock change. Claire replied, "Once Dad is out, the paper follows the reality." That sentence damaged her more than any argument I could have made. It showed intent before Thanksgiving. She did not misunderstand ownership. She planned to create possession first, then force the documents to catch up. She believed a locked door could rewrite a deed. The county attorney filed charges for exploitation of an older adult forgery, fraudulent notarization identity theft, unlawful exclusion from a residence, and attempted real estate fraud. Additional counts covered the custodial fund and false financial statements submitted to Prairie Union. Elise Crane entered a cooperation agreement. She surrendered every device, repaid the $6,000, and admitted using an expired notary seal. Her testimony established that Claire knew the release was invalid before uploading it. Elise still faced penalties, but telling the truth early reduced them. Kirk Danner lost his consulting contracts after his report became public. The licensing board found that he presented family claims as personal observations and failed to disclose who paid him. He was not sent to prison. He was ordered to refund his fee, complete ethics training, and stop marketing himself as an independent senior assessor. Paula Greer and the title company were cleared of wrongdoing. Paula had paused the file as soon as Ruth raised the dispute and preserved every upload. Prairie Union did the same. Their records showed that honest systems had worked when people inside them chose caution over convenience. Hawthorne Senior Living Partners collapsed within 3 weeks. Its bridge loan went into default. North Ark's investors demanded repayment. The office lease was terminated, and the unfinished project website disappeared. Claire had sold certainty to everyone. Once the house left her control, the rest of her promises had no foundation. Several relatives lost money. Ellen lost $12,000. One cousin lost $25,000. Ben's brother lost $8,500. I felt sorry for them, but I did not reimburse them. Each had invested in a project they did not understand. Because Claire said family should trust family, that phrase had already cost enough. The criminal case took almost 11 months. Claire eventually accepted a plea agreement after her attorney reviewed the device records, smart lock logs, title files, and recorded closing. She admitted forging my signature directing the lockout using false capacity claims and taking money from June's custodial fund. The judge sentenced her to prison, followed by supervised release restitution and a permanent prohibition against serving as a guardian trustee property manager or agent under a power of attorney. She was also ordered to repay Haven Door for legal expenses caused by the attempted transfer. At sentencing, Claire spoke for 7 minutes. She said she began with fear. Ben had lost stable work. Interest payments were rising. Investors wanted answers. She believed the senior housing project would save their future and create something meaningful from June's legacy. Then she said each shortcut made the next one feel smaller. Changing an email address felt easier after opening an account. Opening an account felt easier after copying a signature. Copying a signature felt easier after deciding I should not control the house anyway. That was the closest she came to the full truth. Her crime did not begin with hatred. It began when she decided her need was more legitimate than my consent. Claire apologized to me. She did not ask for the house back. She did not ask for a key. She asked whether I could remember the years before all of this. I looked at her across the courtroom and said I remembered every one of them. Memory was not the problem. The judge asked whether I wanted to speak. I stood with my right hand resting on the rail. The knuckles still ached in cold weather, and the courtroom air felt colder than it needed to be. I said Claire had not only tried to take property, she had tried to replace my voice with a version she wrote for other people. I can forgive fear, I said. I cannot excuse what you built with it. Ben pleaded guilty separately to conspiracy document fraud and misuse of the custodial fund. His cooperation early surrender of the backup drive and testimony against Claire reduced his sentence. He served time in a county facility, lost his management license, and entered a repayment plan. His marriage to Claire ended before either sentencing. They sold their West Des Moines house under the lender's claim. Most of the furniture, vehicles, and investment accounts went toward restitution. The comfortable life they tried to protect disappeared through the same paperwork they had used against me. Ben wrote me one letter. He did not ask forgiveness. He said silence had become his profession inside their marriage. First, he stayed quiet to avoid arguments, then to protect money, finally, to avoid becoming the target. He admitted that every silence gave Claire more room to act. I answered once. I wrote that fear explains why a door feels hard to open. It does not explain locking someone else behind it. I wished him an honest life and ended the letter there. The civil court confirmed Claire's forfeiture under June's deed. Haven Door became the permanent remainder beneficiary subject to my life estate. The judge also declared the Thanksgiving lockout unlawful and ordered all removed property returned. The locksmith company delivered my original cylinders in their sealed evidence box. Aaron Mills apologized for continuing the job after my objection. His employer had retrained every technician to require proof of authority when someone requested exclusion of an elderly occupant. I told Aaron the apology mattered because he had written the truth into the service notes before he knew anyone would need it. One accurate sentence had helped stop an entire false story. He nodded and handed me the box with both hands. The first evening I returned home, Walter stood on the porch while I removed the keypad Claire installed. I could have hired someone. I did not. I wanted my hands on every screw. The faceplate came free. The electronic lock lifted away. Beneath it, the old wood showed fresh holes and a pale rectangle where the finish had been covered. I installed a new mechanical deadbolt with a restricted keyway. No application, no shared administrator, no temporary guest code. The cylinder turned with the clean resistance of new brass. Walter watched me test it 5 times and said I had always been a little dramatic about locks. I told him some men bought sports cars after trauma. My knees preferred hardware. We laughed on the porch until my hand hurt. Then I gave Walter the first spare key. Not because he was blood. Because he had opened his home when mine was closed and never once asked what he might inherit. Inside the house looked as if a careless estate sale had stopped halfway through. Boxes remained against the walls. Labels still divided my life into keep, donate, and sell. I removed them one at a time. Some objects returned to shelves. Some went to charity. The difference was that I chose. The fireproof case could not be repaired, so I replaced it. Ruth kept the original deed and court order in her office safe. I stored certified copies in the new case, along with the lock invoice, my notebook, and the Blue Pan's warranty card from 1979. The roasting pan took longer. Claire had left baked grease inside the rim, and one corner carried a dark mark from being overheated. I filled it with warm water and let it soak overnight. In the morning, I cleaned it slowly with a soft cloth. The stain faded, but did not disappear. June would have approved. She believed scars proved usefulness. She never said they had to vanish before something could serve again. Haven Door asked whether it could inspect the house for future planning. Leah Monroe arrived alone and waited on the porch until I invited her inside. That simple courtesy nearly brought tears to my eyes, though I managed to keep them where they belonged. Leah explained that I retained complete lifetime control. Haven Door would not enter, manage, renovate, rent, or inspect again without my written invitation. After my death, the house would support the trust's work. Until then, it was my home. I asked whether June had left any other instructions. Leah opened a thin folder containing volunteer notes, donation receipts, and one handwritten page. June had proposed turning our front room into a small legal information center one day, but only if I wanted it. Her note said Gordon knows how to make a door honest. Maybe this house can help people tell when theirs is being used against them. I sat at the dining table with the page in front of me and the blue pan drying beside the sink. For months I had believed winning meant returning everything to the way it was before Claire changed the locks. June's note reminded me that before was not always the right destination. A repaired house could become more useful than an untouched one. I called Leah the next morning. We began planning monthly workshops on deeds, life estates, powers of attorney title, fraud, smart locks, and family coercion. Ruth agreed to volunteer. Dana Webb offered a banking session. Aaron said he would explain lock records and service authorization. Walter volunteered to make coffee, which was brave considering his coffee could remove paint. The first workshop was scheduled for the following October. That gave us time to repaint the front room, install accessible lighting, and build a locking cabinet for private documents. I did the hardware myself. Every cabinet used a key control log. Some habits deserve retirement. Others do not. Claire sent letters through Ruth after sentencing. The first explained. The second apologized. The third simply listed what she had done without excuses. She wrote that she now understood the worst part was not wanting the house. It was believing my continued presence was an obstacle to her plan. I did not answer immediately. Love remained. Trust did not. I asked Ruth to keep the letters in a separate file. A person can leave a door unopened without pretending there is no one on the other side. By the next Thanksgiving, the house had new locks, new rules, and one room devoted to helping strangers protect what their families were pressuring them to surrender. The blue roasting pan sat in its old cupboard, clean and waiting. For the first time since June died, I planned to use it again. But the people coming to dinner were not the relatives who had watched me stand outside. They were older men and women who understood exactly what a key could mean when the wrong person held it. 1 year after Claire changed the locks, Thanksgiving morning began with the sound of my new deadbolt turning from the inside. I opened the front door before sunrise and tested it twice, not because I was afraid, but because an honest lock should answer the same way every time. Cold air moved through the hall, carrying the smell of wet leaves and the first coffee Walter had started across the street. The house was mine to occupy, but the day no longer belonged only to me. By 8 folding chairs filled the front room beneath a new wooden sign. It read, June Pike, Home Rights Room. Ruth had argued for a shorter name. I told her June had spent 44 years making that house a place people could enter without fear. She deserved every word. The first guests were not relatives. They were 6 older homeowners who had attended our workshops during the year. One woman had stopped her nephew from adding himself to her deed. A retired bus driver had recovered a bank account his son called shared money. Another man brought a folder of unsigned care papers and guarded it with both hands. No one arrived ashamed. That was our first rule. People came for information, not judgment. Ruth reviewed deeds at the dining table. Dana Webb explained account alerts near the fireplace. Aaron Mills showed a sample work order and taught everyone to ask what authority a locksmith had been given before allowing a lockout to continue. Walter handled coffee from the kitchen. His first pot was strong enough to qualify as a building material, so I quietly added hot water before anyone complained. He caught me and said, "That is why you never made management." I told him management was mostly fixing what people did when no one supervised the coffee. The blue roasting pan sat on the counter beneath June's old towel. I had seasoned the turkey before dawn using her recipe card. The handwriting had faded where butter once touched the paper. I followed every instruction except one. June always wrote "Ask Claire to check the salt." This year, I checked it myself. That line on the card hurt more than I expected. Grief does not always arrive during funerals. Sometimes it waits beside a measuring spoon and reminds you who used to stand on the other side of the counter. I pressed my thumb against the arthritic knuckle and let the feeling pass without pretending it was smaller. By noon, 12 people sat around tables spread through the dining room and front hall. There were widows, veterans, retired teachers, and one married couple who had nearly signed their farm to a grandson with unpaid gambling debts. Nobody asked what anyone owned. They asked whether the potatoes needed passing. Before we ate, Leah Monroe read a short paragraph from June's volunteer notes. June had written that losing control of a home rarely began with a moving truck. It began with one password, one copied key, or one paper described as routine. She believed people needed permission to ask a second question before signing the first answer. I looked at the new locks, the deed cabinet, and the faces around my table. Claire had tried to use my house as the first payment on her future. June had turned the same house into a place where other people could protect their present. That difference felt larger than ownership. For once, value meant protection, not price. After dinner, we washed dishes in shifts. The blue pan soaked in the sink, and this time I cleaned it myself before the grease could harden. The dark mark from Claire's Thanksgiving remained along one corner. I did not scrub harder. A scar can stay without controlling the next use. I dried the pan and returned it to the cupboard with both hands. When the final guest left, Walter carried the folding chairs to the front room. Ruth gathered the unsigned papers people had chosen to take home and think about. No one had been rushed. No one had been told that hesitation proved confusion. June would have considered that a successful holiday, and for the first time I believed I had hosted one without merely copying her. Near dusk, Ruth handed me a sealed envelope. Claire had sent it through her attorney 2 weeks earlier and asked that I receive it on Thanksgiving. Ruth said she had checked it for legal requests. There were none. No signature lines. No demand for money. No question about the house. The envelope held only 6 handwritten pages and a return address from supervised housing. I sat at the dining table before opening it. Claire's handwriting looked smaller than it once had. She wrote that prison had stripped away the language she used to hide behind. Transition, safety, planning, family responsibility. She said each word had allowed her to avoid the plain sentence beneath them. "I wanted what was yours before you were finished needing it," she wrote. That sentence was the first apology that did not ask me to reduce the harm so she could bear looking at it. She admitted she had not changed the locks because she believed I was unsafe. She changed them because a locked door made her plan feel completed. Claire wrote about June too. She remembered standing on a chair beside the blue pan and stealing pieces of turkey skin. She remembered her mother returning every borrowed bowl to the correct cupboard. Then she admitted she had spent years treating those memories as proof of entitlement instead of proof of care. The letter ended with one request: not for forgiveness, not for a visit. Claire asked whether she could someday contribute to Haven Door from her prison wages, and later volunteer only in work that involved no documents, money keys, or private information. She said she understood if the answer remained no. I read the letter twice. Then I placed it beside June's recipe card. Love does not disappear when trust is broken. It changes shape. Sometimes it becomes distance. Sometimes it becomes a rule. Sometimes it becomes the choice to keep a letter instead of tearing it in half. I left it on the table overnight before deciding what any answer should contain. I wrote back the following week. I told Claire Haven Door could accept restitution through official channels. Volunteering would be considered only after her release. Her supervision ended, and the board agreed. I would not promise access she had not earned. I would not use forever as a weapon either. My final line was simple. The door is not open. The conversation is... Ruth mailed it for me. That was the beginning of our new relationship, though calling it a relationship felt generous at first. Claire wrote once a month. I answered when her letters contained truth rather than explanation, and I never replied on the same day I received one. 2 years later, after her release to supervised housing, we met in Ruth's office. Claire looked older, but not in the way she had once described me. Age was no longer a defect in that room. It was simply time made visible. She asked whether she could hug me. I said no, and she accepted the answer without bargaining, crying, or asking when the answer might change. We spoke for 40 minutes. She told me about work in a warehouse laundry counseling and payments toward the custodial fund. She did not ask whether the forfeiture could be reversed. She did not mention inheritance. When our time ended, she stood and waited for me to leave first. That small act of patience meant more than another polished apology would have. 6 months later, we met again at a public diner, then once more near Christmas. Progress was slow enough to trust. Claire never entered my house. She never held a key. She never handled a paper from Haven Door. Boundaries did not prevent us from speaking. They made speaking possible without fear, because neither of us had to pretend access and affection were the same thing. The house continued serving the trust. Once each month, the front room filled with people carrying deeds, account statements, and questions they had been embarrassed to ask their children. We helped them create password lists, revoke old powers of attorney, verify notary seals, and document who possess their keys. Aaron developed a small sticker for locksmith companies. It asked one question in large letters. Who has legal authority to exclude the current occupant? Several local shops adopted it. He said my Thanksgiving work order had become part of their training. One careful note, written by a nervous technician, now protected people he would never meet. Dana helped 3 banks add family coercion alerts for customers over 65. Kirk's old report became an anonymous teaching example for assessors. Ruth trained younger lawyers to look beyond phrases like safety transition and family management. False concern often becomes easier to see when somebody removes the polite label. Walter remained the first person with a spare key. Leah held an emergency copy in a sealed trust envelope that required 2 signatures to open. Claire had none. That was not revenge. A key is not proof of love. It is permission to cross a boundary, and permission should reflect conduct. Every person who held one had earned it through years of ordinary reliability. On quiet evenings, I sat on the porch while the maple branches moved over the walk. My right hand still stiffened in winter. The house still creaked at the top stair. Nothing had become perfect because the court agreed with me. Justice restored authority. Living required deciding what to do with it. I kept June's recipe cards in the second kitchen drawer, and her deed in Ruth's safe. The blue pan returned to the cupboard above the refrigerator. Each Thanksgiving, I lifted it down with both hands. It had become heavier with age, though that might have been me. Either way, I no longer mistook needing 2 hands for needing someone else to decide where I belonged. The final time I met Claire that year, she brought no bag and carried no folder. She gave me a small envelope containing a receipt for another restitution payment. I did not need to see it, but I accepted it because accountability should have somewhere to land. She ordered coffee paid for her own cup and did not ask me to praise the progress. She asked whether I believed June would ever forgive her. I looked through the diner window at people crossing the parking lot in the early dark. Your mother believed in repaired things, I said. She also believed they should prove they can hold weight again. Claire nodded and did not ask what that meant for the house. Before we separated, she thanked me for answering her letters. I told her answering was not the same as forgetting. She said she knew. That answer was one of the reasons I wrote again the next month. We walked to the parking lot separately, and Claire paused beside my truck without reaching for the passenger door. She understood that even a familiar place required an invitation now. A deed can name an owner. Only respect earns a key. Have you ever loved someone but refused to restore the access they abused? Would you have answered Claire's letters or closed that door for good? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone reading them may be trying to decide whether forgiveness requires another key. Sometimes a stranger's honest answer gives a person permission to protect a boundary their own family keeps questioning. If this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who needs to protect their home or dignity, and subscribe for more calm stories about family boundaries and justice built on truth. Until next time, read every page, keep your own copy, and remember that no holiday tradition is worth surrendering your voice.